Welcome back to the imaginary gallery and the narcissist bag of tricks. Tonight's topic is something I was thinking about recently, which I figured I would share because it's very interesting and it's very covert. Which means what? Covert, covered up, hidden. Well, it's a manipulation technique of which is used by these coverts, and one of the hallmarks of being covert, of course, is that nothing is really obvious. It requires you, the target, to soak in what's going on and make sense of it. And don't expect any help from the subject in question, because you will likely be thrown off the track if you attempt to use your own intuition to try to reassess a situation involving such a person. I will start out with one of the strange characteristics that these people will do. Because remember, they are basically predators. You know how, like, out in the wild, you might see a fox running around and it spots a little duckling and it pounces on it and eats it and attacks it. Well, that's like two different species. But with the covert narcissist, you're dealing with a species upon same species attack. Now, it may not necessarily involve eating the target, but it's preying upon the target regardless. And I say it's unusual because in most social interactions, people want to present themselves in like the best light possible. You meet a new teacher you're going to be taught from, and you want to look like a good student. You meet a new boss you're going to be working for. Well, you want to act like a good employee. What you will find with the covert narcissist in many instances is something a little different. And it took me a while to wrap my head around it because it's so strange. These people, in many occasions, will actually, for lack of better terms, dumb themselves down for you. And to add to that, it's kind of like I think of when I was in grade school. When you're in grade school, you go to first, second, third, whatever. You eventually have like a mission to no longer be a baby and now be like a little more mature or something like that. And for example, I recall when I was in third, fourth grade, whatever, it was St. Patrick's Day, and some kids' parents didn't pay attention enough to dress their child in something green. So the kid goes to the teacher because several kids, students that are evil, pinched him or her or taunted because there's no green. And of course, I watched this child crying, thinking, oh, get over it. It's clothing, it's color, who cares? But this child was not as developed as I was, I guess. But I watched how the teacher took a green piece of construction paper, cut out a shamrock, and pinned it to the person's shirt. Problem solved. But the point of this is, when you are a kid developing, you look at that and think, oh, that's still a baby. And you can see the growth or lack of growth. Well, fast forward into adult life, which in this case, what I'm referring to would be like in social interactions. these start in childhood, then we get older and we have adult relationships. Well, generally, if you are an adult meeting another adult, you want to behave as an adult. However, in the case of the covert narcissist, which, to put it into perspective, you just met somebody new and there was a spark of attraction. You thought, wow, he or she's really nice looking. Wow, I like what I see. And the other person may be like saying the same thing back to you. It's common that you will spend some time together. Well, what can happen is during this, kind of like that child who cried because he didn't have any green on, well, you may have an encounter with the new person who is interested in you, but does something that kind of resembles that child that cries. Because if you're like more developed and you see that child, the next time you see that child, you're going to think, huh, that's the kid who cried because it didn't have green on. Huh. And you're going to think of them maybe as a little bit lesser than, because you're like, I wouldn't cry over green. I had green panties on, so who cares? But all joking aside, people that are adults that are pursuing you may present themselves in a less than positive light. They may, well, I'll give you a real example to illustrate, because I have a feeling you're lost. So what we'll describe is, I had met a brand new person that I, of course, had been pursuing, like looking at and thinking was pretty or whatever, and got the chance one day after years, months of pursuit, to come visit. Well, had the visitor over, was overjoyed, thinking a success, and so on, and it left. Well, that was like one particular night. And for all this time, of course, I hadn't really been chased back. I would be chasing, but not chased back. But then one particular day, I was in my apartment building downtown on the 8th floor, which wasn't that great of a view, but I was just in the apartment on, I think it was a Sunday, and I like walked up to the window, because they had windows like way up, really high, and so I was just walking over to the windows and looking, and I looked down, and there was that person standing outside of the car that it owned. And I was just looking, thinking, oh, I was just thinking of that person. And no, there was no call. There was no, hey, want to get together. It was just, it appeared. So I saw it and like looked closer. It's like, is that who I think it is? And I'd like, well, I was like, come on up. And then the person came up and said, oh, hi. Because I was like, what are you doing here? And the answer was, well, because I lived in this big apartment building, and it had like 13 floors, and there were like two others that were identical in the same area. And this person said, oh, well, I was visiting some friends over in that building over there, and thought, well, you live over here because of the other night, so I thought I'd just come by and see if you were around. Which is kind of weird in a big apartment like that that's closed, but I just happened to walk to the window. Makes me wonder how long the person had actually been there, but none of that mattered then. And so I said, oh, well, you were visiting friends in the building next door? Oh, well, great. And some kind of social interaction occurred. Well, it was not long afterwards I had expressed my distaste for lies. And this person, which I thought was a very adult-like behavior, something to be proud of, said, oh, by the way, I did lie to you once. And I said, what do you mean? Well, remember that Sunday that I was outside your apartment and told you I was meeting friends in the building next door? Well, I made that up. Because, you see, I just wanted to see you, and I didn't want you to think that I was desperate. Now do you get it? Who would you ever want to try to impress by saying, hi, oh, by the way, I'm being desperate? You wouldn't. And of course, even in this case, it's basically saying, oh, I did lie, but just so I wouldn't appear desperate. So it's the same type of thing, which is very unusual, at least in my experience, that someone would, again, dumb themselves down to appear to be that desperate, chasing, clinging, stalking, maybe even. And it was just weird, and that's not the only situation I've experienced this in, because if it was, I would have probably forgotten about it. But when I compared it to other experiences later on down the road, it seems, again, these people have the same bag of tricks, and they pick out the different mechanisms based on what situation they're trying to achieve at the time. What does this do? It serves a function. Because, first off, when you think of narcissistic personality disorder, the usual default thought, it would be like the overt. The one who walks in, I'm in charge of this place. Who are those fools over there? Give me a table. That would be like the overt. Well, when you meet the covert, it's like they're actually in disguise to be portrayed as the opposite of the overt, where they actually reverse and act like they're like this one. I didn't want to appear to be desperate, but I wanted to see you. Well, that's not the behavior of somebody who thinks they're on top of the world. And of course, it's phony. That's the whole point here. It's a tactic that is used to get you, the target, to raise yourself up a little bit on that pedestal, because you're thinking to yourself, oh my goodness, that person admitted to thinking I think it's desperate. Wow, oh, I must have gotten something good here. And that's the whole point. Because your time will come down the road for the tables to turn, but you won't know this, because that's what these people love. They love beginnings because they can be a fresh, clean slate and act this way, and that's all they'll act like. So you have nothing else to go on. So you'll think, well, every time I've seen this person, it's been the same way. Well, guess what? That's not the way these people operate. This is like stage one in the idealization phase, because they are being the path of least resistance. They're being accommodating and flirtatious and flattering and anything any regular person would possibly want. Giving, generous, so on. So you, of course, encountering this friendly person, plus seeing what appears to be their human being. Oh, wow, I respect this person for admitting that he wanted to see me but didn't want to appear to be desperate. Oh, that's admirable. Well, guess what? That's one of the hooks they sink into you. Because by deliberately putting themselves lower, it, of course, puts you upper on the pedestal, and you start to think, wow, I got this. This person's a wow. It just seems wild, because it's great if you find a person you click with or you get along with. I mean, that's just universal. And yet here you're dealing with this, thinking, oh my goodness, not only is this person nice, but the person's even human enough to admit that it's embarrassed or feels shy or whatever. And of course, nothing could be further from the truth, which you learn later. But of course, you haven't reached that yet. So I'm here to warn you, not to say that if anybody's nice to you, to run. Just if anybody does this kind of thing to you, then be aware. Because remember, if it is one of these predator people, and you say, hey, I can't help but notice you have done A, B, C, and D, and I think that you might be a predator person, do you think they're going to admit to it? No, they're going to resort to the common gaslighting of, you think too much. I just like you. Is there anything wrong with me liking you? Which, of course, is a part of the gaslight. But then again, it could be true, too. So it's difficult terrain to cross. So the point of this whole presentation tonight is just to let you know that sometimes the least likely candidate to be toxic person is actually very toxic and knows how to cover this up. Because, like with this situation, come on, who would ever think that someone who would act like the example I gave would ever have any harm intended for you? It's like they're admitting, oh, I'm not perfect and I like you, and I'm basically kind of making a fool of themselves. And of course, you being a person that's had social interaction will be like, wow, that was daring. And that is like the point, because you will not be suspicious. Whereas, let's say the person shows up with a big fancy limousine, big fancy fur coat, says, oh, here, let me buy $1 million worth of drinks for you. Well, you'd be like, that person's kind of fishy, fake. But with the opposite, it's like a covert technique that's used. I'm interested if any of you out there have experienced anything like this, where a person will basically present themselves to you in a less than type situation, when really, when you uncover the mask and pull off the mask, you see you've got a ruthless monster who does or says whatever it thinks it needs to say to get what it wants. Yet none of that's apparent in the beginning, because they are covert. So I'm interested in hearing from y'all.
If you want to see me nude with my 7-inch heels on, come on down to the Shady Lady. I've got what you want, whether it's male, female, or she-male.
I lost my daughter at Sandy Hook. I lost her. She didn't have any legs. Tough. Photoshop took care of that. But I'm over it now. I'm ready to start again. Come on, Obama, give me a new project.
I know we've had this discussion before, but my private parts actually are public. So don't feel intimidated by it. It's just the way it is.
I don't expect you to understand, but my parts are public because I am a sex worker at the Shady Lady, and that's all I have, my part. So you and I can still be lovers, but just don't think about where my parts have been when you're not around, or whose sausages have been sliding inside of them.
Look, if you can't see that you got a good thing going, I can't make it any more clear for you. I am obviously the only one who will ever accept you. Stop being so judgmental. Give me a chance.
You're never gonna find anyone as beautiful as me.